to the Lexington Public Library's community panel and demo on called AI and You. My name is Brian Clausing. I'm the Digital Studio Supervisor here at Northside. If you're unaware of the Digital Studio, it is a space back there that's a Mac lab that has a full production studio, an audio booth, and the full Adobe Creative Suite for content creators. It's part of our experiential learning spaces that includes 2 maker spaces and then the Kloiber Foundation STEAM Lab for teens and tweens. So very excited for you all to be here. I would like to introduce our 2 moderators and then our esteemed special guests here. To my left here is Lori Davis. She's the Lexington Public Library's Workforce Development Manager. So if you've ever been to one of the LPL's career fairs or intern fairs or the Grow with Google programs, Lori is the one who has put that together. She has 2 outstanding programs coming up that there are flyers on that back table. One is a construction trades learning program, and this is at our Marksbury branch, and this is where you can learn. This is for adults residing in Lexington who are 18 years or older with a high school diploma or GED that's interested in learning an entry-level skill trade, and it's going to be using VR. So if you're interested in that technology front, please pick up a flyer there. And then Lori also has a Grow with Google webinar with Tennessee digital coach Netta Dobbins for entrepreneurs called Cybersecurity in Your Business. And that's going to be Thursday, May 2nd at 5 p.m. Our other moderator for this evening is going to be Rick Selnow. And Rick is a digital studio associate, so you would see him back working in the digital studio. He has a background working at KET as part of their education team. He helped on the KT show Quiz Show, and a fun fact about Rick is that he has a sumo wrestling podcast that he does. So pretty fun. Kayla Aldridge is also a digital studio associate, so you can find her working back in the digital studio as well, and she'll be up later to as part of our demo presentation after our panel discussion. So that leads us to our 2 special guests. Danielle Meadow-Stinnett, to my immediate right, is the owner of Octane Design Studios, a 14-year-old branding and identity firm based in the heart of the Bluegrass. Danielle is a published creative, a certified prompt engineer, podcaster, strategist, wife and mama of 3. With over 15 years of marketing and multimedia agency experience, Danielle began as a grassroots developer and curator, helping brand and launch hundreds of small businesses across America. Her prompt journal, The Playbook, gamified small business journal, details branding and social media strategies for small businesses that are engaging and interactive, just like a video game or board game quest. In 2021, Danielle restructured and relaunched Kentucky Creatives, a Kentucky-based membership community to help connect small businesses with digital creatives for their brand. We're also joined by Dr. Aaron Garvey. Dr. Garvey is a UK Associate Professor of Marketing in the Gatton College of Business and Economics. Dr. Garvey's research into branded product consumption, human AI interactions, and consumer design making has been published in academic journals, and his research has been featured in numerous popular press outlets, including NPR Morning Edition, The Today Show, The Wall Street Journal, and The Economics, and more. Prior to earning his Ph.D. from Pennsylvania State University, Dr. Garvey spent 6 years in various product marketing and management positions in the Fortune 500. So, let's give a big hand to our moderators and panelists. So we're gonna start the panel, and then we'll have a Q&A after the discussion, and then after that we'll do the demo of the AI software. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our moderators for the evening.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thanks for everyone for coming. I did want to add one thing just at the start. So we've got a few larger topics that we want to start on, but if there is anything that we're saying during the discussion that prompts a question in your mind, we are going to have a Q&A at the end, but if you can catch the eye of me or Lori or someone that you have something pertinent to what we're talking about, we'll try to loop you in as well, because we think it's going to be beneficial if we can have sort of an open discussion with everyone and kind of touch on whatever ideas anyone has as we go through. But like Brian said, so I'm Rick Selna. I work here in the digital studio. And so in the digital studio, we have access to a lot of this type of software, especially in the capacity of for creatives, right? Whether you're using Photoshop or whether you're creating videos or music, things like that. But before we did that, we wanted to have sort of a program covering what are appropriate use cases for this, because we know there's a lot of concern, rightfully for sure, with this sort of AI revolution, right? So we just wanted to have a discussion of what the library's role can be and how we can move this stuff forward. So that's kind of my relationship with AI. And then my co-host here has been doing some experimenting with AI herself in her own capacity. Did you want to touch on any of that?
Absolutely. I'm Lori Davis, Workforce Development Manager here at the Lexington Public Library. And so I, like many others, are interested in jumping into AI from the perspective of working professionals as well as entrepreneurs. And so to be able to do that and share that across the Lexington community as well. So my favorite thus far is ChatGPT, and we'll get into that a little later. It has really been a game changer for me in terms of productivity and some of the things I've worked on.
And I love, you gave me a couple great pivot points there, both game-changing and the idea of entrepreneurs, our first guest. So Danielle, did you want to introduce sort of your experience with AI in your workplace currently? Or yeah.
Sure. So my space in AI really, there's not a point really in my life on a day-to-day basis that I'm not touching AI on some level. Whether it's content creation, whether it's ideation overall, I find AI to really be a tool that I can wield to kind of move further and process faster. So that's really kind of where my job kind of duties rely in regards to being a graphic designer and a creative director.
I love that. And then so like talking about those ideas of moving faster, and then you can cover more ground, expose more people, which Dr. Garvey, like your research has to do a lot using AI. Well, I'll just throw the same question. Could you introduce a little bit of your experience with AI or what your relationship to it is?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's really two main areas that it's impacting what I've done. One is on the research side. I guess I'll get to that. But the other is, I also teach. So there's been a big impact of particularly generative AI. And when I talk about AI is it's a pretty broad umbrella, right? There's a lot that falls under that. Really what everybody's excited about is different forms of generative AI. So you've got things like ChatGPT 4, which is a large language model, right? So it can essentially produce a pretty convincing illusion of you having a chat conversation with a human, right? You've got things like Midjourney, you've got DALL-E, you've got, Firefly is the Adobe version that's more along visual arts, but they use similar, they're essentially similar setups. And is everyone here really familiar with how, say, like a large language model, what it's really doing, like how it basically works? Okay, so what a large language model is basically doing is just a series of nested, and it's at its heart, it's a series of nested statistical models. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to predict based on all the words that came before it, say like a question that you asked it, and all the data it was trained on, which is a pretty good chunk of the internet, right? Based upon everything that's come before, what should the next word be? What's the highest probability word that should come out next? And it does it one word at a time. So it's not thinking like a human. It doesn't have even though you might hear a neural network thrown around or whatnot, it doesn't think like a human. It's just trying to figure out what's the highest probability word that should come next. If I was asked this question and then I started off with this word, what's the next word I should say, right? And it's a similar process for the graphic or the visual type of work. So that said, I'm seeing it impacts how I'm seeing it impact students. I'm seeing students right now primarily use it as a productivity replacer. I think to Lori's point, probably what we're going to have to do in academia and in education is figure out how we can have them use it as a productivity amplifier. So what students are going to be doing, how they're doing it, the scale of what they're going to be working at might have to increase because they have these tools now. And then in my field, and so I study marketing and consumer behavior, a lot of it is trying to make sure that my primary concern is that people are, AI is used responsibly. It's very persuasive right now. So I look primarily at persuasive capabilities of AI, and I think there are probably some consumer protections that will need to be put in place over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly where we wanted to start, is this concept of large language models. And so basically the idea being AI will spit out what it's fed on, right? So whether that's, we're going to touch with Danielle moving forward on this idea of like, okay, well, if you feed it the art of artists, do they need to be compensated? These kind of questions. Or the idea of, if you are a bank and you're trying to use AI to increase the productivity of your staff, and part of that productivity involves giving like housing loans, and you feed it information on past data on how housing loans were distributed, is that going to exacerbate income inequities, racial inequities, things like that in our communities? But so that's why I'm really glad Dr. Garvey started us out there. Like, the Skynet's not real, right? And AI is not a person, but what it is doing is trying its best to think like a human based on what humans have done before. So on some level, it's really important what we as humans do, what role we take moving forward with it to kind of scaffold that. And if we do not take that responsible approach, then there are questions of what will be the result of that. And that's kind of where we wanted to start with the entire discussion. Is our guiding question for today is kind of this idea of, what does the Lexington community need to know about sort of the responsible, creative, and innovative uses of AI? And then how can the public library assist? We want to know how we can be a vector for that responsible use in our community. So with that said, like, I'll throw to you, Danielle, what do you think are sort of the primary concerns for you when you think of the idea of balancing innovative and responsible with the use of AI?
I think for me, the main thing that kind of comes to mind here is understanding, one, the language model, and two, what your specific inputs are. So we talk a lot about, like before, Dr. Garvey and I talked about seed prompting, and mentioned that the amount of information that you give it actually can deter and determine the output of what you get. And so we talk about innovation. We talk about finding opportunities where we can develop with AI, feeding it more. And I'm going to give an example right here that you actually suggested earlier, which is this picture from the Lexington Library magazine, heads up for Lexington Library magazine. And it's like this AI kind of photo. However, you can notice that there's clear differences between one side of her face and the other side of the face. We would take this as faux pas. We would take this as a piece of art, fine art, if you will. But actually, it's just AI trying to figure out, what do you mean? And a couple more question marks. And how often do we take that as a piece of content, and how well we can pass that on as a piece of content? It's kind of one of those ethical questions, like how far do we go? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? In this publication, this worked. It kind of proved the point that AI is still rendering, right? AI is still figuring it out. So to your Skynet point, it's still trying to manipulate the things that we tell it. So over time, the ethical questions that I would ask are continually, what are we doing to make it work better? But better is also interpretive, in my opinion. What is better? Is better faster? Is better accurate? What is better? So that would be my ethical question that I would ask around this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Going right back to it's like, begin with the end in mind, right? Like what's the point of progress we're trying to reach with it? I love it. Yeah. Especially because even that piece of art, like, it makes me think of like Picasso, right? Like the idea was to distort perception in order to create a higher reality. But like, is that what we want? Just make sure you say what the end game is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dr. Garvey, how about in your circumstances, what do you think would be the most important things for people to focus on when they're thinking about balancing responsible and innovative in getting to better, but still making sure they do that in the best way possible?
Okay. Yeah, so I guess we could look at it in a few different contexts. So there's kind of a focus on creative applications, right? And there's a lot of that in marketing, right? Brand development, imagery, right? This could be something very easily used in an ad campaign. It's kind of an ad campaign right now, right? So the ethics around the creation of something that is based upon other people's work is a very gray area right now, because if you look at how large language models and these more visually oriented generative AIs work, there's a very small fraction of somebody's input that goes into creating something new, and it's a lot of people's work. And it's very difficult to distinguish and uniquely identify what someone's piece or cut of that might be. And probably OpenAI was the company that is responsible for, say, ChatGPT, was not super discerning when it came to copyright protections on what they used for their training data. Right? There's a lot of copyrighted material that was used for the training data. So it gets very difficult, all right? In everyday world, if you're developing a new brand logo, you're going to look at existing brand logos. You're going to run it through your own mind and your own experiences, your own creativity. And probably you could make an argument that whatever brand logo you come up with is a variation of an existing brand logo that you've seen before, has huge elements of an existing brand logo that you've seen before, right? Really like this logo that had a red and white color scheme. You create that logo. So I think there's still a lot of conversation that needs to be had around that. Probably the first big step, I think, one of the first big steps in like ethically handling creative work is making sure that the training data, if you have an artist or if you have a writer that does not want their information included in the training data, there need to be mechanisms in place to exclude it, because it kind of cuts off that question entirely.
Yeah, I've seen ideas of the same way that there's like fair trade chocolate and fair trade coffee, and they stamp a label on it. People have talked about creating fair trade AI, like a seal of approval saying they meet these ethical standards, saying, hey, we have paid every artist for every image we've trained this on. Hey, have we paid every author for every book or article we've trained this on? That kind of idea of it's fine to do it, but make sure that we are not leaving people behind just because you're not actually using that artist's work. Like, let's say I took a picture of two sumo wrestlers fighting, right, and wanted to use it on my podcast. Someone would need to pay me if they wanted to use that image, hypothetically. It's not just that, well, we didn't use your image. I'm like, well, you fed it in, and that's how your computer learned how to draw a picture of what a sumo ring looks like.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, I definitely agree with that, because I think it's important to still support and have a market for novel, creative, innovative work, because otherwise, if we just spin for the next 30 years on whatever art was created up until now and everything else is kind of a variation of that, it doesn't sound very good.
Sounds like the end of creative input, yeah. And yeah, Lori.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is, or follow up on, is about how we as public libraries across the country, and specifically here in Lexington, can really help bring these issues to light. Of course, we're having this conversation now, but other ways that you both think would be appropriate for libraries to get into.
Well, I'm trying to think on my head. I love being able to use the library as safe spaces, and I think that's really important for me growing up as a child, for me being raised literally 6 miles from this very spot. And it's very important that libraries continue to be a safe space for innovation, for education, and for inclusivity. And so I love the fact that as we talk about this particular topic, ways that we can, again, kind of connect with our librarians, with our techs, our creatives, using their knowledge and growing from there as well, but also leaning a little bit further in on the community of it all, being here in just the space amongst all of you various shades of hues, different life backgrounds, things along those lines. I think those combinations plus technology is kind of where we're advancing forward and being more respectful to what we can do with technology, specifically AI. Hope that answered your question.
It does. It does. Dr. Garvey?
I guess I automatically kind of think of it from an education standpoint. And I know that the library is really important. It was important for me in like early life education, right? So there are a lot of, before you're even in school, once you're in school, there's a lot of extra education that occurs at the library. And I think there is a real opportunity, and you hit a real swath of people at the library, right? It's not just, and I think that there are a lot of people that get opportunities at the library that they wouldn't have otherwise. So if I think about, moving forward, what would be really valuable to someone's education is the ability to use generative AI to accomplish things that a single person wouldn't be able to accomplish historically, right? So like now if you're really good at, I don't know, Danielle and I were kind of talking about this earlier. Right now, if you're really good at writing and you're a very creative writer, but you're not very good at visual art, but you would like to make a storybook or you would like to make a graphic novel, you can't do it, right? And you kind of have to be a polymath to be able to do it because, how many people do you know that are really good writers they're out there. You might know a few, but you probably know a lot of really good writers and you know a lot of really good visual artists, and one or two of them are both. And now somebody can be both or be all of that, even if they're not a super good writer, but they're just motivated. They could create these things. So kind of helping to educate people on how to accomplish goals or objectives they have that use skills that historically they would have to have really honed, or they would have to have relied on somebody else to do one portion. They can do it. They can kind of do a lot now, right? And I would kind of education. There are prompt engineers on the West Coast that make hundreds of thousands a year just because they know how to use generative AI, say ChatGPT 4, to get nice results. Right? There's a lot of value in education on that right now, and really, traditional primary education isn't doing that yet. So I think the library could really help to lead in that, and really help a lot of people with it.
And is there a fear, particularly since you are a professor at the university, is there a fear amongst some of your colleagues, professors who might be very unsure about students utilizing the technology in the classroom for, say, research papers, assignments generally? And so how do you start to work with professors to kind of get them to see that it's not the boogeyman that they expect?
Well, it's hard, right? I still haven't figured this one out because it kind of is the boogeyman if you use our traditional education approach, right? Because the real fear is that, I say I sign a research paper, right? Historically, you'd have to go out and read a bunch of book chapters and journal articles, and you would write it up. And ChatGPT can do that. Now, it won't get the references right because, again, it doesn't really know these things. It's just going with the highest probability word that comes next. So it'll just come up with a citation that kind of sounds like it makes sense, but it doesn't actually know our journal article, right? It's just kind of crafted, right? So there might be a journal article that is from, that'll make up an article with a title kind of like something 3 different people in my field could have, and it's the real name of those 3 different people, but the article doesn't exist. But it's really convincing, right? It speaks with a lot of conviction, so it looks like a good paper. The real fear on our side is that you're just gonna all the mental development and exercise that comes with doing all these things is not going to be happening if somebody just, a lot of those research papers you've written before were really painful and not a lot of fun, but you're a more formidable person because you did it mentally. Right. And I think all that mental exercise, we're worried that that's not happening right now.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm bouncing off of you entirely. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that he mentioned this because Dr. Garvey has mentioned multiple times, like, there's a level of just spitting out. And there's a point where AI always has to have a human touch. And no matter how far we advance in generative AI, we're going to have to find a way to get back to leaving some level of carbon footprint, virtual thumbprint, to ensure that the work that's being spat out is actually verified and true and accurate. So I really emphasize that. I kind of put up a cultural spin on this. AI in a lot of ways is much like an opportunia in a MuggleNet world, right? Versus really honing in on it being more of an Aunt Tabby who clearly understands and sees but has not yet formulated a response.
Super. Yeah, all of that. Because I know the idea of atrophying mental muscles. Like teachers complain. So I taught at the middle school level, right? And they complain all the time about texting and autocorrect. And then students don't know what they're doing when you tell them. Because one way you can get around a student using AI to write a response is do their responses in class. Say, you have 60 minutes, here's your prompt, here's what you're going to write. But then the idea of like, well, if those muscles have atrophied, it's game over. They can't do it anyway. But then also, like Danielle says, it's so interesting. The idea of, I don't know if this is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so do respond. But like the idea of like, see and wait, that human touch of like, don't respond immediately. That's what a computer does or whatever. But do you actually think it? Like if you go see a movie, you can actively view a movie or you can passively view a movie, right? And we might go see a Marvel movie and they're formulaic, and so we can passively view it. But if we go and see, we could actually actively view it too if we want. Look at the cinematography. Think about what the sound engineer is doing. Stuff like that.
Right. Absolutely, completely relate to that.
Yeah, it's a really good point you got, Danielle, because right now, output from all of these, it's easier to pick up sometimes on like the visual AI, right? You see see the other side of the face looks totally different, or there's two, somebody's got their hands raised and there's a second hand coming out or something like that. So it kind of like jumps out at you. But when it's written, it's much more insidious. There's most ChatGPT, if you have it try to write about some topic that you could have an expert human, right? So you ask it questions about physics or something. You could have a physicist in the room explain lift on an airplane to me. It's going to get a lot of stuff wrong. It'll sound very convincing. Even if you ask it, are you sure about this? It'll tell you it is. But if you have an expert physicist, they'll point out inconsistencies and inaccuracies that exist. They're just very hard for us as, for me as a non-expert physicist to pick up on. So yeah, I agree. You're always going to have that human touch. Yeah. Maybe not always, but there's, I have seen Sam Altman interviewed. He's the CEO of OpenAI. Right, and he says it might be a hard limitation on how large language models are developed. It really might be a hard limitation. We might never get to where we can get total accuracy and get it to even understand, even to get us a gauge of how accurate what it just said is. Right, it can't even assess its own confidence in something it says. So it's very possible that for a long time you'll have to have human checks on, especially things that are very factual. Right, you'll have to have human checks on that.
Especially, written text AI is extremely declarative and definitive. It is always very confident in itself if you read it, but there's no certainty behind it.
No, and it doesn't know how certain it is. You can ask it. It cannot assess that.
But ChatGPT does say at the end of every request, it says that you do need to make sure you are verifying this information. I've not said the exact wording, but it does tell you that, it may be getting things wrong. So then I think that still helps students, in the case of education, still recognize that this is a starting point and you need to fill in the blanks and make sure that everything that you have seen in ChatGPT, for example, is accurate. So you still are going to have to use those research muscles. You're still going to have to check your citations. So it's not the easy way out. And I think maybe communicating that with professors and other academicians is helpful. One of the other questions I wanted to ask was, how do you see AI changing your particular careers now and the fields in which you work?
Okay, let me start this one. Okay. So I think that when it comes to how we educate students in what they do. That's probably going to be one of the biggest things when it comes to just the standpoint of education. When it comes to being a researcher, and as a researcher, there's a few major elements of what I do. I do a lot of experimental design. I do a lot of running studies, but then I also do a lot of writing, and I do a lot of statistical analysis. Probably enhance productivity quite a bit. So you probably will see like the pace that research can be conducted in my field and other fields is going to accelerate, right? So there's going to be, there's even preliminary work in some areas. These large language models can mimic a human response so well that people are even doing pilot research studies with ChatGPT as a human for a subject, right? And then to see if something's worth exploring. So I think what you're going to see in my field is, I think in other research fields, particularly fields that deal with research on people, right? Social sciences, you're going to see a real acceleration in productivity.
What about the future? You have to use your crystal ball or whatever it is.
Oh, like far future? Far future. I think that productivity is going to go through the roof in a lot of fields. And I think that's going to mean that those fields will expand. So I actually don't necessarily see in a lot of the fields that AI really takes off at, in that there's going to be a shrinking in the labor force of those fields. But, and this is, who knows, could be, right? This is just me throwing it out. But I do think that productivity is going to increase dramatically. I think that the kind of skills in each one of these fields that is going to allow for a lot of success is going to change, because I think that particularly there's some traditional technical capabilities that had to be honed over years that are now just kind of not less relevant, right? Just kind of, it's kind of like a second industrial revolution, right? And there used to be a lot more silversmiths and goldsmiths and things like that. But then now when we figured out how to kind of do those things through automated processes and with molds and things like that, you just don't have that workforce. But you have a lot of people working on the molds, and you have a lot of people that are still making the products, but it's a different skill set, a different kind. So I do think you'll see some disruption in like what the skill sets are.
So that just is another way of making sure that we as professionals, folks in the workforce, are really honing our skills and being more malleable in terms of our ability to pivot, because that's just going to have to happen. Yeah.
And if as an expert in your field, or like whatever field you're in, spend some real thought to figuring out what are the particular skills that might get replaced, and what are, not saying replacing your job, because again, it's going to be something where your expertise is, because it's imperfect, your expertise is still going to be very valuable. But where are some things that are going to be less important and others that are going to be more when using AI? So I would learn how to interact with and use AI. I would be playing around with ChatGPT in my spare time a bunch.
Danielle?
My response to that is, as the world becomes more robotative, we need to learn to be better humans. So I think that's kind of my response to this. We have to find some way of using and amplifying our soft skills, which is what we encourage a lot in our young people. As a mother of 3 boys, soft skills are absolutely essential as we move across into this new technological age. So as we become more robotative, I think that's my response, is we have to find ways to continue to be human in that process.
I love that. Any specific ways that AI has changed presently for you in terms of being a graphic designer, a creative, generally?
Absolutely. So again, everything has kind of changed in the landscape of being a designer in 2024. Everything from graphic design to web development, from just content creation overall. We now have bots, we now have AI, we now have these generative formulas that formulate ahead of us. And so for me, leaning a little bit on AI, using it specifically in areas of ideation, I'd like to focus more so on what, instead of using models that is, I'd like to follow up on models that could be. And so that is the way that I choose to use AI in a more creative element.
So if I can, because shameless plug, you can blame me for it or whatever, but Danielle has a book, The Playbook, which talks about this idea of gamifying the creative process, right? And gives its prompts, which is interesting because it goes with what Dr. Garvey is saying about there might be a new field that comes into being that is a prompt engineer, someone who knows how to appropriately manipulate the language that is fed into a large language model such that it gives out the response you actually want. So with that in mind, what do you, well, oh man, no, you guys, these are great points. Use your words, Rick. So, because the reason it's so interesting to me is because, like Dr. Garvey says, so if something might go away, like for instance, in web development, I used to work in web development at KET, and so some of those things like coding, like AI can do that, but it can't do it perfectly. But so the skill, if for instance you are a coder and we're talking about developing a workforce, traditionally that's been seen as an incredibly safe, locked in career, like you're going to make $100,000, just boom, you're locked in. Well, now that might go away, but what might be important is being a troubleshooter, a beta tester, someone who's going to go parse that code or that HTML and see where the errors are and come out and things like that.
Yes.
But that is very much an editing process. So the reason I wanted to bring up the playbook is like, where do you think the beginning process, like as a storyteller even, like how do we tell stories to AI if we're going to use it to augment our work rather than supplant it? What do we need to do?
Absolutely. So again, I used an example of seed prompting before, where we outline the things that are in order to determine what it can do. Mm-hmm. And so seed prompting is just, again, one of many different types of formulas that you can use generative AI to formulate something different. So for example, I would use the playbook. I'm a small business owner. I'm looking to, I'm a fashion small business owner. Let me just be more specific. And I'm looking to amplify my revenue over the next 6 months. How can I use gamification? How can I use small business marketing in this climate to excel my business? Again, that is a very long way, and I can probably add even more detail to that to be more specific, but it will definitely spit out and generate a plan. Now, the plan isn't the answer. That's the real point of this conversation. It really is just a guide. So what you want to do from that point is, again, fact check. You want to conversate. You want to make sure that formulas and words match. So one of the things I constantly tell my kids as a parent is your words and your actions have to match. That's how we know that it's true.
I love that. Yeah. And so, Dr. Garvey, do you think in the same idea in a marketing landscape? So if we talk about like invested stakeholders in AI and things like that, and when we talk about, I loved Danielle's comments about needing to stay human with it, right? If not to be negative, but if the idea is to have this responsible use and to be thinking with the end in mind and things like that, but there are people, if there's one thing to be afraid of, it might be who's using the tool and what ends are they using it to. If it's purely like a profit-making endeavor, we've seen even with social media and things like that, how you can make a lot of money in ways that are negative for people's mental health and things like that. Is there an idea of how we, like as the library, if we're going to expose people to generative AI, what something we can encourage them to do to be responsible in their storytelling through that would still be effective?
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying. So basically, like somebody who has bad intentions, right. It could be like an amplifier for somebody who has bad intentions.
And not even necessarily bad, but amoral, not immoral, amoral. They just aren't considering the moral complications, that kind of idea?
Yeah. To me, I don't know if that's particularly an AI. It's difficult to make that AI specific, right? So if somebody has bad intentions, or if somebody's a bad actor and you just amplify their capability through AI, then yeah, it is an issue. But I don't know how to make them not a bad actor in the first place. That's a tricky thing. I will build on your point, Danielle, about working with AI being like, you had a nice statement where you said, like, you can ask it to give you a business plan, but that's not like the end state. And it's a very iterative process. So I think teaching people about that interactive iterative process, you mentioned coding. And AI can do coding, but it can't really do coding. It can kind of help you. You have to have a fair amount of expertise to know what to ask it to do. And then when it comes back, it's probably not going to work. So you're going to have to be able to look at it and decipher it and figure out how to fix it. But it can make I did some coding recently to develop an experiment. And I'm using like Python and JavaScript and all that. And I would say I'm like a poor coder. I'm not even mediocre, right? I'm not an expert in this. Like I couldn't go make a living coding. But I have some knowledge, right? Like, so I can do it. So, but I'm this poor coder, but it makes me a good coder because I have just enough knowledge to ask it what to do. And then when it comes back, I have just enough knowledge to kind of be like, oh, maybe there's something wrong here. Hey, is there something wrong there? And it's a very iterative process, but it's almost kind of approaching it like someone else who's imperfect that can help you get something done, right? Yeah. And it's important to look at it that way and not as just someone who's going to do your work for you.
Yeah. No, I love it. Thank you. That's like, this is exactly what we wanted, is to assuage fears, and you are stamping out one of mine. That's like, one, the idea that a bad actor doesn't have anything to do with the AI, right? If I'm talking about immoral versus amoral, right? Like someone without morals versus someone who has bad morals, like the AI is amoral. It's not evil. It's just going to do what you say. So that has more to do with society, like Danielle was saying. And if we teach our kids how to be responsible humans, so I love that AI is not the thing to be afraid of. Just go into your community and build strong relationships. But then beyond that, the idea, like you said, like I definitely think I was overstating that. Yeah, it's not that it can code, it's that it can. Ones and zeros are a lot easier for it, so it can generate a lot of stuff. But it's not necessarily the code. You still need someone who has taken the time to learn C++, Java, Python, whatever it is. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Yeah.
So who loses in the proliferation of artificial intelligence, if there is a win or lose aspect?
Well, I think there's pros and cons to both. AI loses because as much and as hard as it tries to mimic us, it will never be us. But the pro to that is that we as humans still have this superhuman ability to lean on the tools and processes to get us ahead, to progress forward. And so I think there's pros and cons. There's no correct hero. There's an anti-hero. That's kind of my response to that.
Yeah, I guess if we could, okay, I'll take the question as like in society, who loses?
Correct.
Okay, so in society, who loses with AI taking off? I think not a whole lot of people, because I think what it can do is, like I said, it's like, if you are in not a you're growing up in a household where you don't have other people. Say you want to become a coder and you want to get into it, but you're growing up in a household where nobody's ever done that, and you're in a school system where they don't offer good computer science classes, much less good ones, right? You can still learn how to code now, whereas like 30 years ago you couldn't, right? So I think that I don't think there'll be a whole lot of losers. I think in the short term, there could be a few people that are enjoying having very unique, specialized, highly technical skills that they may have to branch out in their versatility, right? But I don't know if there's a ton of those people as a percentage of the population. So like a coder, like somebody who's just like their real forte is just hardcore coding knowledge. They see the ones and the zeros, and that's a unique skill now that's super valuable, but maybe a little bit less than it was 5 years ago.
How do we best communicate that no one or very few people will lose out by utilizing AI? And I know that you had a follow-up.
Oh, no, I was going to continue to kind of echo off that. We're using ones and zeros, so I have to use matrix references. So it's really important for me to kind of see beyond the ones and zeros. Everyone can't be a Neo, but everyone can be a Trinity. Everyone can be a Morpheus. And so it's one of those situations where we can't always see it as a foe and an enemy. We can also see it as a carrier. And so that's kind of the way that I was envisioning just from hearing you speak. But to answer the additional question, I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Well, I think I wanted to find out how we can convey to people that this is not the way you have described it, a win-lose type of proposition, and that it is something that we should embrace or begin to embrace and utilize it in a responsible way.
Absolutely. So again, kind of going back to that ones and zeros, we're all sourced in this binary code, but what makes us very unique and special is our ability to, again, pick up on certain elements, being able to be more heightened in one area where another person can have a different type of diverse skill set, being able to combine, collaborate, work together versus working apart. I think those are some of the biggest superpowers of AI. And so those are ways I feel like that we can all kind of work together in that way to make it easier for one person to level up versus another.
Still referring back to those critical soft skills. And
Yes, absolutely. Soft skills is where it's at. That's what kind of defines us as a human in a lot of areas. And so when we forget that, we become more like the robots that we try to serve.
Absolutely.
Did you follow up that?
Oh, no, I was just taking a breath.
So in that capacity, then, are there growing pains currently in your industries for it? And as we try to get to that point, because I do love what you say, Danielle, even like what I was thinking as you talked about like people working together, even Dr. Garvey's example, let's say I'm a kid in rural North Dakota and my school does not offer any kind of classes like, but I can learn that. They've talked about like in the pandemic, this is something that would have been really useful to kids if they could have sat on an iPad and had a tutor, right? Even if it's AI, like, yes, you'd rather have a human tutor, but that can bridge a socioeconomic gap. You're right. This is so like what challenges arise from that? Because nothing rolls out perfectly, right? Do you see any friction points in that currently?
Friction points for me, obviously access.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm one of very few women of color who speak about chat prompt engineering and whatnot. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Excuse me. So as we talk about, availability and accessibility for a lot of people, I do feel like this is where the library can actually step up. This is where the library is kind of meeting people where they are, where access is maybe limited in some areas. The library can be a doorway for a lot of people to continue this education, using that example of coding. So I do think that there's room for growth where we can kind of meet each other in that place. But it is, I feel like over the next 20 years even, I'll say even 10 years, will really kind of define where AI is meeting people and filling in those gaps overall.
I love that. Yeah, Dr. Garvey, do you have anything to add in that, in the idea of how we meet people? Like if the library has an access point is good, and then
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there are just providing the gateway itself, right? Like you have computers, you have people, you have people coming in that may or may not have access literally to like the internet at times, right? And you can and you can provide that, open that up. But then I think also just like increasing awareness. There's still a lot of professionals have gotten pretty up to speed on ChatGPT, but there's still a lot of people. I mean, 3.5 wasn't really a thing until like late 2022, right? And that's kind of when it really took off. So we're like a year and a half in. There's a huge chunk of the population that's never used ChatGPT. They have no idea what it is. Probably if you asked, it's very convincing, right? So you all are familiar with Alan Turing and the Turing test, right? Which is that there was going to be this huge jump forward when we could convince people that an AI was a person on the, you could basically, this is back before they even had monitors, right? He said you could like pass notes back and forth between a wall and have the computer write what was on the note. And he's basically said AI is kind of like a person when someone on the other side can't tell that it's an AI versus a person writing the notes, right? Well, a lot of people that interact with these large language models, it does look like Skynet to them, right? They don't even understand. So probably even just education on what is generative AI would be really valuable, right? Just people understanding like, what is this thing and how does it work? I think would mean a lot. Because I think a lot of people, it's because you just interact with it and you use it. And it can be very it can be kind of scary, right? It's kind of, there's a weird moment, probably all of you all have had it when you use ChatGPT for a little while and you're like, wow, okay, this is very different than anything I've ever interacted with before. And I think that moment is different for different people.
No, I love that. Especially, it makes me think, we've done some classes in specifically Photoshop. I see some of our attendees of previous classes and things like that. I think it's like you're saying, it's scary until it's not, because when you have to use it to see the limitations and understand that it's not an all-knowing super being. For instance, you mentioned it's comical, right? But if you tried to ask Firefly, like we're doing in our classes, hey, add a man on the street corner, he'll have 48 fingers. I don't know why he'll have 48 fingers, but he will. Or it's plenty funny when we can see, like, I don't know if you've seen the meme, the puppy coat Pope, right? Like Pope walking in a puppy coat, like it's funny or whatever, but it's not real and stuff like that. So that idea of at least exposing them to him, if like laughter erases fear, maybe, like if we can see the mistakes it makes, or again, the text is a little different because it is so declarative and stuff, but if you can see where it gets it wrong, then maybe that would yeah. Can I solicit some free advice with both of your backgrounds in marketing? How do we get them to want to come in and take those classes?
You want to take a stab at that one?
I mean, sure, yeah. I mean, well, let's see. Like, incentive drives behavior, right?
True.
So, I think like the value in it, right? So there's a little bit of mystery. What is AI? What exactly, right? So just in like kind of demystifying AI, and maybe having something where it's like helping people to understand that there's not like a little silicon brain that's popping all this out, right? Which is so just kind of them understanding what it is, I think could be really interesting and kind of promising to help them understand that could be interesting. And then just how to use it to
use cases,
like to help you in your personal life. How do you use it to help you in your professional life? I mean, I could see different threads even, right? I think there could be like a how to use GPT to help you in your personal life could be a very interesting thing.
Love that. Yeah.
That was my response as well. I was going to say real quick, put her on, right? Put her on, put ChatGPT on, show exactly what you can do with it. Give examples where it's getting it wrong.
Yeah.
So that it shows the flaws and how you can fix them. Things along those lines. When we point out the problems, a lot of times that seems to be more, how do you fix that? Well, the library has a class specifically pointing this out and how you can address it. So, yeah, going for the pain points.
Write that down.
Yeah, I know. Right? Well, and even I love it too, because we did with the Woodhill Community Center, we did a class where we had them put on a radio play, and to do it, we were going to teach them like editing skills and things like that. So we had ChatGPT, or I think we actually used Gemini, but which was called Bard at the time, whatever.
Yeah.
Generate a script for them, but like the names it generated were like very out of place for the community we were about to go into, things like that, and there were certain things that just like didn't fit in, so then we could go in and edit like that. I'm thinking like you're saying like that about, we've touched on previously why the editing process is important, but two, like how can you actually use this? So there's maybe better ways. We talked about like maybe having a tutor or something, like how can AI help you with your algebra homework, things like that. But as long as because that's something that would be appealing, I would hope, in a community that doesn't have the same advantage as some of their peers, how that could be used.
That could be, how does AI help you plan a family vacation on your budget?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I have this much money and this is a location. You'd be surprised at what it'll do. You could say, I live in Lexington, Kentucky, and my budget for the trip is $800. And what are some interesting things I can do? And it'll tell you, okay, we'll go, take a trip into the mountains and go to this park and do all this. And it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And even beyond, like, how do I pay off my credit card debt or something like that? Like, how do I budget to pay off my things that we can do that maybe...
And they're not perfect.
No.
But it's a lot of information that people, you're not born knowing a lot of these things.
Right.
So it could help people in their personal lives quite a bit.
Yeah, and because this has been fed on the knowledge of humans, like at the end of the day, AI doesn't exist without human input. And so like, because it's been fed on information of humans who've gone to places on vacation, humans who have paid off their credit card debt, humans who have done those things, that it at least has some insights. Those will come out like one letter at a time, and so they might not actually pertain to your specific situation, so the editing is still important, but these are still benefits, and how we could use it to push things forward. I love that. Yeah.
From a pure entertainment standpoint, We just did this also for spring to kick off April. So April showers, we're also thinking of new things through generative AI. And so we decided to do a rap battle recently between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, because that's very popular on social media right now. So we decided, if the topic was spring, give us a rap battle between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. We're releasing that as a batch series, but to hear it specifically go through a model where it was kind of rhyming and nursery rhyming in the first phase. Phase 2, we're seeding some more, asking more specific questions and directions, how clean it became and more refined as it came. And then we published what that looked like between using Gemini and using ChatGPT for the same seeding prompt. So it was just kind of comparison. That's another way that you could also use that to leverage your class.
I love that. And you can get back, like Lupe Fiasco uses TextFX, right? Reportedly to, help him with lyrics. So cool.
So we probably have some entrepreneurs in the audience who may want to know how they may be able to utilize AI in the promotion of their business entity. So ideas about those things that you might be able to share with entrepreneurs or those who are considering entrepreneurship.
Well, I can definitely speak to that a little bit, if I can keep my cough together. So in some areas for entrepreneurship, I use AI to not only talk about my creativeness and how we can kind of get over some creative obstacles in regards to content or creation, but also using it to a growth plan, as you mentioned before. How can I take the information that I have around myself and use it to propel myself a little bit forward? So I highly encourage that. Financial planners, daily lifestyle planners, social media guides, things along those lines are great tools that generative AI has been able to produce for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, I think, that entrepreneurs can do. So there's a few different angles. So as you mentioned, Danielle, in the running of your business, a lot of entrepreneurs don't have, I mean, some of them have some formal business training, but even formal business training doesn't really hit on a lot of what you need to be a successful entrepreneur. It's a little bit different than being in a larger business organization. Not a little, it's very different. And so budgeting appropriately, allocating your spend appropriately. If you don't have a lot of experience coming in on this, then that can be really valuable to at least give you a baseline to start working with, right? Or if you've got a feel for it and you can give it details and kind of refine it based upon that. So kind of administering and running the business just from like a profit and loss management perspective, I think it could be really valuable. It could also be lots of times entrepreneurs are they're working on small budgets. They've got big ideas, and they probably have skills in a few things. You've got to be pretty capable to try it, but you can access more skills now through AI, right? Like you can have another zero-cost employee in ChatGPT that can maybe write some things for you that you'll have to proof and that you'll have to edit, or it can generate art that you'll have to make changes to and know how to snip or whatnot. But there's a lot more that you can produce based on. So one, you just got to be like creating the products itself and how you create it. And then the other would be kind of using it to manage your profit and loss.
Sounds good.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And then what do you think, like, as we've touched on it a little bit already, but on a community level, so if the library, if we're going to be a focal point and go out and we've seen these areas, we can use it, like societally speaking, especially Dr. Garvey, we were talking a little bit before this about a recent article you and your colleagues posted that is titled, "May I Ask You a Personal Question?" I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating to me because you break down how in some ways people were more comfortable sharing private information with a confirmed like computer, a chatbot, than they would a human, perhaps because it removes some fear of social stigma and things like that. Are there ways that we can actively work to use AI to reinforce positive social norms or programs or things like that? Do you think we can infer that from that research, or?
Yeah, I think you could. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing, right? So kind of what you're talking about is that it's not super surprising, right? But you're more likely to disclose really sensitive, personal, embarrassing kinds of information with an AI chatbot than you are another human, right? Because you're not going to be judged in the moment. The word's not going to get around on it, so you'll disclose. So we even looked at it in like therapy sessions where people were much more likely to disclose to a therapist that was an AI therapist for a human to be way more honest, right? Like, hey, this person I really care about in my life did this. Should I be okay with this? Kind of things, right? Things that are very, very personal. And so, yeah, I think there could be situations where AI is going to let people really think through things out loud in a healthy way, right? Or really work through some things kind of in private, but not really in private.
Yeah.
That, kind of give them a sounding board to really kind of work through some things in their life. Yeah, I think you'll probably see more of that as time goes forward.
That's super interesting. Even in recent times, I have a couple of friends who work as therapists, but they've talked about as health insurance has shifted to actually cover mental health things, they're not staffed at all for it. Like they're way overloaded, overworked, and things like that. And so maybe if that could alleviate at least some of those things or be the entry point, like you still need the expert at the end, but at least that helps people find a professional who might benefit them, or maybe some people don't need to go that far, and it removes some of those issues initially. That's an area I hadn't actually thought. It's so interesting because if AI is supposed to be a soulless computer, actually in one of the most like soulful areas, that maybe it could actually benefit. That's really interesting. Danielle, do you think that it like in the sort of same way, like, are there ways we can shape messages around AI then to kind of dispel some of that soulless? Again, keeping in mind everything we've said before about needing to keep the human side, but actually to get people to know that this might be a way that, like, I think recently, like last week tonight, did a special on scams and how many of these financial scams go unreported. People get bilked out of their retirement savings and then don't tell anyone. And they might never have gotten the money back, but if they had told someone, it could prevent the next person from getting it. Are there ways we can tell stories around that, more humanistic stories, even about the computer, or use it to exaggerate or emphasize, magnify? Yeah,
Amplify. Amplify is the correct word. I think that is extremely helpful in these communities when we talk about blogs or video testimonials or even faceless marketing. That's very popular right now. There's ways that we can exemplify all of that through storytelling in generative AI. There's plenty of AI out there now that, again, kind of uses this whole faceless marketing where it's just pictures and videos and automated faces even, AI-generated faces and voices. As a voiceover artist, I completely can tell the difference between a human voice and an AI voice, but for a lot of people, they don't see that variation. And so it's really important when we talk about storytelling in ways that we can amplify where AI can either be a friend or foe. But I think in the storytelling element, it's really about just continuing to follow more of a formula for storytelling. And I kind of talk about this a little bit more in some of my classes, but overall, it's really about showcasing what the problem is and kind of unifying humans in that way, where we can meet people where they are through storytelling. So when I say this, I'm really focusing primarily on outlining what that problem may look like for people, but then also finding ways where they can solve their problems. From a marketing standpoint, that's what primarily anyone and everyone is looking for. They're looking for a way to solve their problems. And so whether we use a human voice or an AI-generated one is the question. But for overall, I definitely encourage people to create stories or create elements where it engages people to solve a problem.
No, I love that. Super interesting. And then even the stories I was thinking of, like, do you know Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey?
Oh, yeah,
right?
That's exactly where I was going in my mind. Yeah.
Right, so AI can learn that, right? It can learn, here are the touch points of a tradition. For those who haven't read it, it's just this idea of he goes and studies different cultures and different mythos and finds commonalities. He cuts out a lot of stuff that doesn't fit his model, but this idea that you can tell a story that's compelling. And the biggest example is, he says, the first Star Wars movie. It just is the hero's journey. So maybe you can use that. And because that's fascinating to me from the idea of like guerrilla marketing, right? Think about every Instagram influencer and things like that. That idea of companies want someone who the person they're talking to trusts already, right? Yes. every podcast you listen to starts out as free, and then somewhere along the line, stamps.com is there and aggressively.
Right.
But yeah.
Absolutely. Instacart shows up somewhere, and
Yeah.
Spotify Premium shows up somewhere. Yes.
Yeah. But the idea that so AI can do part of that, but then the human element, I guess, is still necessary, which is good. Like,
Absolutely. I think, and again, we kind of focus on what was is kind of leading what could be, right?
Yeah.
We can't build without knowing what we're building with, what we're going from. And so generative AI is kind of using this model, or they're picking up on those human experiences more and more. How do we formulate a better one or more tight-knit forming stories so that more people are attracted in a shorter or faster amount of time?
super interesting. Yeah.
So what industries do you all think are really leading the way in terms of pushing AI into the forefront? Dr. Garvey?
Well, I mean, obviously the technology companies that are really developing them right now are going to be the biggest. Which industries are going to benefit the most? Probably everything is going to benefit fairly dramatically, just based upon AI's ability to speed up software development. Right, because software development is to span all industries. So I think every industry is going to be sped up, right? So you're probably, and I think this also kind of gets back into your earlier question of like, you know, who's long term, what are the benefits, who's going to win, who versus, you know, who's not. I think the pie is just going to get a lot bigger, right? So it really is like a second industrial revolution. And the first industrial revolution, there were some growing pains, but at the end of it, medicine was way better. Everyone had more access to education and literature and you know, the bare necessities, like all of that got better. And I think the pie is just going to get a lot bigger with regard when it comes to AI. But I think I think every industry is going to get advanced quite a bit because of software development. I think that where it stands currently, a lot of the creative industries are going to expand dramatically based upon this. So I think the pies in those industries are going to get bigger. There might be some switching around of people that are in those industries, I think can still be successful in them, but there might be some updating of skill sets that need to happen. But I think there'll also be a lot more people that come into those industries.
Thank you. Danielle?
I think that's exactly where I was going with this. It's just creating a bigger pie, a bigger open world where we can all play. But at the same time, there's going to be some kind of limitations, some additional criteria that's going to have to be set on who can play, when they can play, and how they can play.
So President Biden has initiated some discussion about how we should handle or contain the proliferation of AI. What kinds of considerations do you think federal and state governments should have in terms of regulating AI, in terms of reliability, making sure that there aren't inappropriate things on it?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I mean, there are already a lot of the companies are trying to self-regulate currently because they don't want government involved, right? So if you go,
Exactly.
if you look like what OpenAI is doing, I think also what a lot of the art platforms are doing, they're kind of made to where you can't really make inappropriate images, right? Mm-hmm. Like there are certain prompts where they're like, I'm going to pretend you didn't type that in, right? Or like, hey, I can't make that. And then you can there's similar guardrails on, say, GPT-4, right, and 3.5, where you kind of say like, hey, write a manifesto about some real terrible topic, and kind of say, I'm not going to do that, right? So like so there are self-regulations in place. Probably the government will need to step in if that self-regulation breaks down. It probably will over time as you get more and more competitors in this space with different leadership and whatnot. So probably you're going to have, but I would hope that you could apply the current standard that you have. It's a tricky conversation, right? Because it's like, I would hope that you would apply the certain standards you have on like what can be, what can be published, what's censored and what's not, and what's what can be, because we do have things that are, right? So it's going to be it'll be an interesting conversation. Right now, I think it's not front and center, but I think it'll hit in the next few years.
And copyright law and how that might impact any type of regulation that will happen external to those entities.
Yeah.
Copyright's going to be the biggest issue, I feel like, in a lot of areas where we're talking about patents and ideas and things that are already established. As we kind of talk more about, copyright specifically, because that's something that we have to deal with on a regular basis in content creation, is what is appropriation, what is not appropriation, what is proper credit due, what is not proper credit due. And it is a fine line to walk. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to a morale kind of perspective of what are we honoring, what are we not honoring, what are we discarding. And AI can't do that, but humans can.
So with that said, those are really interesting points to me. And I was thinking, even like Lori said, I remember seeing there's like a database now where you can see what every government agency has to list what AI they're using and what they're using it for and things like that. So some of them are using a lot of, like the EPA was using it to build models, like you were saying, taking away maybe some of these jobs that would have been for statisticians or people building probabilistic algorithms and things like that. To determine where they think there might be pollution in water systems, things like that, which is definitely going to help a community. So when we look at that, is there do we need to advertise what the guardrails are to the community to try and assuage some of that fear? Like, do we need to communicate that better? Are they not communicating? Or is that doing a disservice where, like you said, if over time those self-imposed guardrails erode simply because of market competition or another reason, will that create an idea where people still have this confidence maybe that has gone away? I don't think I'm wording that very clearly. What can or should we do to instill confidence in the community or in the idea that this is being used responsibly? That would be question.
Maybe for me, again, kind of results.
Yeah.
Consistently showing that something is doing something effectively, repeatedly.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about the results that I get in any type of prompt that I give generative AI or ask it to do something, it, as you can see with like 3.5 ChatGPT and some of the other in Gemini, you're seeing that it's learning as it's going. And so I think that's the overall definitive rule that I'm thinking. As long as we're learning as we're going, this is kind of like the compass that we're using.
Yeah, so kind of how do we ensure people that, I don't know, I would kind of lean towards helping people to make their own judgment as to whether or not it's being used responsibly. So I guess that kind of pulls me back towards making sure that probably the best way is to help people really understand what this thing is, right? How does, what is it really? How does, how is it infallible? Yes or no? How is it being, when it's used, how is it being used, right? So when it's kind of, so when you said that the EPA has been using it to make these statistical models, actual replacement, to me that was really scary because I teach statistics and I run statistical models all the time, and I've had ChatGPT run stats for me before, and I've looked at the results and just been like, oh my gosh, this is completely wrong. And then I've had to go, and it's told me it's right. I've been like, are you sure about this? Yeah. And then I'll go back through and I'll find the error, and I'll be like, well, when I look right here, you're not doing this right. And it'll be like, oh yes, sorry about that. You're right. I'm not doing it right. And here's it fixed. Yeah. Here I fixed it. Now this works. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure, 100%. Okay. Well, so it's not infallible, and it doesn't know when it's messed up, and it can't assess how confident it is and whether or not it's messed up. So I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's not. I mean, maybe right now it's not being used well. I don't. In a lot of situations, it could just. There could be government agencies out there that are like, "Hey, ChatGPT, what's the answer, and they're just taking the answer. I'm not sure, but just educating people on kind of what it is, and will help have a population that knows if it's being used well or not.
Right. That's got to be the end goal, I feel like, is having the population educated to the point that they can be appropriately skeptic about it. Brian just shared an article with me the other day that NPR took. There were a few private companies that were advertising that they can help you determine if, coming up into the political season, if a video is a deep fake, if this is real or not. And they were putting out information. Don't take this as effect. It's something like they were saying with 80% certainty that something was a deep fake, and then they're like, no, that's a real video. Like, this is actually a recording of one of our radio hosts and things like that. And then those companies, after the report came out, changed the advertising on their websites to soften their stance of what they were saying it could do. But that's what I'm curious about is, I guess, what can we do? Are the interested stakeholders, because as you mentioned, Dr. Garvey, which is just true, like, incentive is what motivates, and their incentive was to sell subscriptions to their program, and their program wasn't doing a good job, but they weren't going to say anything about that, and maybe they didn't know, because like you said, their system probably told them it's like, no, 100%, it's perfect, because it only knows how to be declarative. So I don't know, I guess that's what we'll have to get to as the library and what our role is maybe in serving as a vector of education there. But also, in that same vein, we wanted to take the last chunk of time we have here to try to open it up. If anyone had questions in this vein, like, what are some things that you still have questions about? What are things that, if we're trying to be liaisons in our community for that appropriate use? Did anyone have any questions? Yeah, yes, ma'am.
I'm a retired social worker, so this is where I come from in this question. Would you take a few minutes and maybe summarize where each of you feel like economically where this will have an impact between those who are stereotypically in white-collar jobs as opposed to those who are skilled workers implementing the typical dirty job guy? Mm-hmm. Would you all make some comments about that, especially the workforce?
And for the sake of the, we're recording for the students at Bryan Station. Hi, Bryan Station. So I'll just repeat the question so they can hear it on the recording. But yeah, for what are going to be the economic impacts on traditionally white-collar communities and jobs versus maybe what we would stereotypically call blue-collar, the idea of working in a trade, things like that?
As a third-generation entrepreneur, I can definitely attest to this. So working as for trade, if you're a plumber looking to solve a leak that normally you've used your 20 years of experience, formulating an answer. However, you can't find the answer. Using generative AI can help you problem solve a little faster instead of relying on your friend that you may have to call or relying on a customer service line that you have to wait 45 minutes to an hour to get a natural response from a human from. This is ways that you can populate and render faster. So coming from a blue-collar standpoint, I relate to being able to use AI to, again, ideate, problem solve faster.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So, yes, a lot of skilled labor. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge in there, and a lot of it has been compiled and shared, and in the training data that a lot of these large language models were used, were trained on. I think that it'll be, if you look at from the perspective of like communities that are primarily white collar versus communities that are primarily blue collar, be more disruptive in white collar, right? It'll be more disruptive. That's where you'll have a little bit more of folks maybe having to reshuffle what their expertise are, re-educate themselves, kind of acquire and develop some new skills. And you'll be more disruptive in that area.
And if I could just jump in, I just wanted to say that I think the lines are going to be a little bit more blurred as time moves on between what is considered a white-collar job as well as a traditional blue-collar job. And I think the same types of tools that you would imagine that white-collar workers are utilizing, blue-collar workers are utilizing as well. The skilled trades are no longer what you envisioned from 50 years ago. It doesn't even have that same connotation of gritty and dirtiness. It is very moved into more of a high-tech environment. And for those of you who are interested, we have an online training in the construction trades. And so be sure to pick up a flyer. I just had to put that plug in there. Thank you.
That is interesting. And I think with like Danielle, the idea of social media advertising and stuff like that, like there's a famous TikToker, right, who like mows lawns basically, but he goes and finds really like dilapidated houses and then makes their lawns look like mansions, stuff like that. Things, ways you can merge the concepts. Yeah. Any other questions that we could address or comments, concerns, anything that was interesting or not? Yeah, yes, sir.
So with tagging on to that, so I heard McDonald's is going to open up 25,000 McDonald's. That would be no human beings, robots. What's your thoughts on that?
So the question is, there's been the reports that the viewer has seen of McDonald's opening up to 25,000 stores that are fully automated, no human staff, and what the thoughts would be on that.
I'm going to be eating a lot more apple pies. That's what that's like. No, but overall, I think that is both intuitive and daring and dangerous at the same time. There is, again, some level of human touch that needs to be involved with AI. So I'm very curious of how they are structuring that system, how technology is kind of advancing. Now we can touch screen our order instead of verbally telling other people. This is one step in that advancement. However, the ethics of that, is it being customer service verified? Is it how are reviews being taken in? Things along those lines. When we give our McDonald's survey on whether or not we got cheese on our cheeseburger or not, who does that go to? Does it go to a person? Does it go to a robot? Where does it sit? Where do we review? So there's a lot of questions I have in terms of completely automating these systems where we're so used to humans being a touch point.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. So you're talking about that's basically getting into like the merger of AI and robotics and just fully automating away human jobs. It can happen in some industries. The extent to which people are going to engage in that is still up in the air, right? Like the value attached to interacting with a person that prepares your food, the environment that brings along. I don't know. I actually don't have a feel for how that would be planned out, right? So if you want to go out to a nice dinner, could you ever imagine a place where you would want to go that you didn't have somebody cooking the food and somebody at least interacting with you when you got your food, right? Is that the experience, or is that what will be valued? I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question as to whether or not automation itself could lead to some big changes in labor, but it's not entirely clear. There's been a lot of conversation about automating driving for a very long time, and that's not materialized. Even when it looks like it's feasible, there's still a human element that's been kept in it. So I think that's still an open question.
Just to kind of add on that, like there's great examples of this currently here in Lexington, like K-Pot right now on Richard Road. They're bringing a robot is issuing your plate, your tray, your food to cook your food. There's lots of ways where AI is kind of taking that automation and moving it forward in some ways. But I'm curious to see the market research that proves that McDonald's is actually taking into consideration or value that having robotic automation is more conscious or better serving to their communities than a physical person. It can't always come down to numbers. And McDonald's is working on that quite a bit right now with their, marketing language and their brand association with people and trust. I'm just curious to see what market analysis and data shows that using robotics is a more prominent route to try out versus what their current model is.
Yes, yeah.
Not sure how to ask my question, but could you take a moment to discuss what you think the economic impact on the country will be in regards to, in previous revolutions that we've gone through with technology, things were very expensive on the front end. and then costs come down as things are implemented on a widespread basis. So where do you see AI, because this is a different technology, where do you see that economically impacting on a much larger scale? Will things become more expensive or less expensive?
So to repeat, I think the idea is for the sake of the consumer, right? Like traditionally, when there's a technological revolution, at first things are more expensive as there are lots of inputs, raise the price, but then they do come down. The idea that I can buy a T-shirt for $5 now, which is something that would be a luxury good if I lived in 1800 or something like that. Like, yeah.
Yes, not sure how to word it.
I like to use an example. I'm an example person. So let's say, for instance, currently, Shell and Quick Mart are using currently automated ways to check out to get your gas. Currently, they're using a touch screen. They're using a weighted scale where AI simply puts all the things you want from the grocery mart, weighs it, scans a little barcode all by itself. There's no limit or need for a cashier. When we talk about the need for a cashier, that's kind of obsolete, right? It's kind of a one-person job. Maybe they're getting paid, I would hope $15 to $18 an hour, maybe, in there. But we talk about the management job, the person above that. That person is in charge of the AI. That person is in charge of reporting back to corporate on a larger scale. So in terms of going from using AI as a tool to now replacing a person, to now replacing, hiring more managers, things along those lines, I do see an economic stimulus kind of feel where we're going to see a lot more of those jobs taken by AI. But over time, I do feel like it's going to level out. I think, as we've seen in the past with several other instances around economic growth in our economy, we've seen where the spike in the price of food is going to go up because of whatever's happening in the world. We're going to see that type of reflection in AI as well as it takes over and embraces and provides more jobs.
Mm-hmm. I think just from a kind of like a consumer spending power perspective, it's hard to say. I can't really make a statement about whether or not, I don't know what it's going to lead to some kind of inflation or does cost of goods go up or whatnot inherently. I can't really speak to that. I do think, you might have situations where if you're talking about AI embedded in products, right? So as you could easily see LLMs getting, you could have an onboard LLM on your phone or something like that. And if you were the first person to have that, you could have a pretty tremendous advantage, say at your job or, just in kind of managing your life. So yeah, there might be some situations where that happens and it becomes more available as it becomes more mass market. But as far as a macro economy, I can't say.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
In relation to a digital machine, AI treatment, and also what impact will ChatGPT have on education? Because I think it's a big shock factor for some students and etc. In my opinion.
And just when you say digital machine, do you mean like the hardware? Like what hardware would be needed for people to access it? Okay, yeah. So the question is about what are the needs for like equipment like digital machines to operate AI, and then beyond that, how they feel AI will impact education more broadly.
Okay, well, I think from the digital machines, you basically just need something that can access the internet, right? With that part's good. It's like, if you have something that can check email, then you have something that's capable of interacting with, say, at least with like OpenAI's platform. Right?
Microsoft Copilot is being pre-installed on every computer they sell now.
Yeah, I've got a 15-year-old laptop in my place that if I want to, I can fire up and get on chat and interact with ChatGPT. Right. Mm-hmm. So as far as devices go, it's quite accessible. From an education perspective, I guess one of the biggest impacts is, I think in the short term, what it's going to have is, and Rick, you mentioned this earlier, was it's actually going to have in-person education. So we'd with the pandemic, we'd kind of shifted there in this, what looked to be like a shift towards remote education. I think the fact that remote education is inherently based upon using the machine that can have an LLM open on it, answering everything for the student, is I think you're going to see a shift back towards a heavier shift in person, right? I know that I've just seen it in college courses. Not too many exams are being given at home now. There was a real trend to basically have them all be given at home. A lot of them are being given in person. I think you're going to have a lot more of like human face-to-face engagement and doing activities, doing workshops as part of the education process, and less of a take this, go home, and come back to me with a 5-page document that shows that you did some work. I think that's going to decrease dramatically.
Do you have anything to add, Danielle?
No, I think that was really spot on. I was going to mention, as a parent wanting to see their child succeed in education, it's really important that we see that level of work, that intuition, that gusto that gets them excited or inspired or encouraged to do something. And so for me, when I think about, any type of generative AI in regards to education, I want to see my child using the knowledge, not just necessarily formulating the knowledge. So I think that's where I encourage this level of learning. Seeing AI encourage someone, inspire someone to do something else.
I like that. And just if I can add a little bit, so just as a former classroom teacher, like the biggest struggle I had in the classroom was the class size in the public school system. As more and more teachers flee the field for justifiable reasons, the ones who remain are so overburdened that it's impossible to give the authentic, intentional, direct communication with one student that is so crucial to education. So maybe AI, if someone has a tablet that can offload some of the base level things, the base level instruction, and then you can use it to identify which students need specific interactions and what those interactions are. Maybe it helps teachers become more super teachers and ration their energy in a way that sadly is extremely necessary considering the current state of the field.
Can I add to that?
Please.
Also, as a special needs mom, this is already being done in some areas.
Oh, great.
So being able to work with a specific child and understanding what their strengths and what their not so strengths are, so that they can not properly, but better learn, educate. That's a great way that AI is already kind of rendering itself in that way to help students be better students.
I love that. Yeah, as a guy, I've been out of the classroom for half a decade. So yeah. Yeah.
So on the creative side, let's say there's someone who wants to be an author on any subject, but maybe they're not the best when it comes to English. So is it possible now, or is it going to be possible then, that this person can supply the basic gist of the story and AI can basically with better words or edit? Is that partly what?
Absolutely. There's tons of transcription models out there now. That's even more popular as its own genre, whether you're podcasting or if you're creating a video that you want to be transcribed in multiple languages. So book publishing now has taken a whole new breath when it comes to being accessible to more people in more languages, even if you only speak one specific one. So I love that you bring up this question, because that's becoming more and more of a popular trend that we're seeing. People who don't have the skills to draw, but they have the skills to write. How can AI and generative AI meet them where they are so that they can do both?
I love that. And even just like, I think about that when I think about maybe even in Lori's capacity, the idea of like finding a job and needing to reintegrate into a new community if you've come there from somewhere else. Like I know Samsung has it default on there, but like you can literally hold up your camera app to things in another language and it'll rewrite it in a different one.
Yes.
My wife and I used that watching some Korean soap operas that were like, what is going on here? I don't know what's happening. What is this Hangul? Yeah. Dr. Garvey, do you know anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, it's just one example of a lot of ways that it can be really beneficial. So a lot of my, several of my co-authors are Korean or Chinese, and English is not their first language. But so when they, typically I would copy edit the paper because English is my first language, or we would hire a copy editor. But now you can just, before they if they're writing a section of the paper, if they're writing the general discussion of the paper, they can say, they can just have ChatGPT, don't change any references, don't change the content of anything, but if you see any typos or, the sentence structure is, needs to be cleaned up, do that, and it'll go back through and fix it.
But there's
and
still
do a decent job.
But still, you would, in those instances, review. A human would take the last final
I would review
look.
it, and I've also done it enough to know what I need to tell it up front to not change, because otherwise it'll change it and you'll just have a big mess. And once you fed it through, so it's very different than just like saying, write me a short story about X. I mean, you can do that, but the quality will be pretty poor.
And it goes, reiterating that idea of like new fields opening up, teaching kids how to be a prompt engineer, if I'm using the terminology correctly, right? Like teaching them, this is how you need to talk to this to get the response you want. Yeah, I love that. If there's maybe one more question, we do that. But otherwise, we wanted to also show a demo of some different AI softwares so that, like we were talking about earlier, you can kind of see what it is, what it does, what its limitations are. And maybe that either alleviates fear or ignites some interest. And maybe you want to come back and use some of the software for yourself, see how it could increase your productivity. Again, our speakers talked about like there's definitely opportunities if you are a small business owner hoping to get into it where you can use these to increase your capacity at the beginning and maybe have a competitive edge before these things are universal. But before I did that, I want to see, did anyone have one final question before we move to some demo material?
Well, I did have one disclaimer. I did have one disclaimer, except for it's probably a little too late to have said the disclaimer now. But I did ask a couple of questions that I found through GPT today. So I utilized the technology with both of you, and you all didn't seem to be, seem to think that was inappropriate. I don't think you could tell, but maybe you could. So it just goes to show that you can utilize some of the AI and people may or may not know. So, we're sports. Yeah.
The embedded kind of discussion.
I did.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I'm actually going to back out here and log into real quick my account on ChatGPT because one thing we wanted to do as we talk about small business owners is some things that you can do are, one second. Bad hosting. My brain does but one thing at a time. Oh no. I'm not going to be able to guess
Garvey
it.
says you should ask ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, what is my password? Yeah.
I can ask it the guesser.
Let's see if I can use Gemini real quick just as we go.
And that's another popular thing. I don't know if that's a future conversation. A lot of people want to lean on one versus the other. They ask that big question of which one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Gemini or ChatGPT, and of course we play with both. But there are some distinct differences, I feel like, between the two language models. And I'm just kind of curious if there's people who have those questions or if that's a particular topic of discussion for the library that would be.
That's great, yeah, and especially because there's lots of articles out there for at least the image generating ones, and you can see their strengths and weaknesses. Like you can often tell the image generating ones to create art in a certain style. Say, give me a picture of a forest in the style of Impressionism. Give me an image of the forest in the style of anime, like whatever. And some of them, depending on what they were fed, are going to be better at certain things than the other. If I use one of them that has never seen an anime, then it's going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right, here's a forest, stuff like that. But like one thing we can do just like for today, if I asked Gemini to say, write me a contract for a public speaking engagement, and we'll see what it would do for us. And one thing to keep in mind is, like Lori was saying, look for disclaimers and things like that because you always want a human effort. If I go at the end of this, hopefully it tells me something about how this is... nothing down there. Oh, wait. Yeah, thank you. Gemini may display inaccurate info, including about people, so double check its response. So this idea that, like, I should have a lawyer read this. If I'm writing a contract, at some point, I can write the thing, and it can maybe give me a good idea. So, like, I saw one thing. Yeah. I was just, you want me to go to the bottom? I was going to go to the top.
You should do that. Okay.
Oh.
I was going to try to read it from the top.
Oh, no. I was just... going to show one example, like certain things like travel expenses. Let's say I was doing something where it's in town and I'm not traveling any distance. Well, I might not need that clause. So I would know that I could go in and edit this and remove the things that are not necessary or are necessary. And then obviously things like leaving the dollar amount blank. If that's something you want to fill in, it can go. But now, sorry, I'm going to go back to the top for your sake. So we can see what it got for us. So this public speaking engagement contract agreement is made and entered into as of date, by and between, and then it's asking for me and the organizer. That's pretty good, right? And you can see this is like what both of our speakers were saying. It's trying to mimic legal documents, right? Because I asked it for a contract. So it's throwing in lots of whereas and heretofore referred to as, things like that.
And they're in.
And therein, yeah, indubitably. So it's giving me things, but those might not necessarily be what I was concerned about. I'm more concerned about the actual meat of the text. Organizer is planning an event on, give it the dates so that we know, what am I agreeing to? I'm going to be here at this time. I'm going to provide this. Like this sentence. Now, therefore, in consideration of the mutual covenants contained herein, the parties agree as follows. Mamma mia. Like, am I speaking to the Pope? Like, what? Yeah.
The word covenant got me.
I know.
That got me.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is a covenant.
No, right.
All right.
Didn't bring my cup.
In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sanctus. Yeah. Okay. So services speaker agrees to present the presentation at the event in accordance with the following specifications. So things like that, like wordiness, even like our commenter's question of, frankly, English is not Gemini's first language. So the reiteration of present and presentation. Maybe it's something like speaker agrees to present the speech or something else if you diversify that language to make it sound more native. Organizer agrees to pay speaker a fee for the services provided under this agreement. The fee shall be payable as follows. So like, these are good things. These are things that I might not have thought of. It's saying, okay, you get 50% upon signing the contract and 50% after completing the event. But maybe that jogs in my memory. Oh, I also want to put in here that payment needs to be a check because my accountant says I need a paper trail if I'm a small business owner. It might jog my memory, but that's something that's not here. So these are just kind of some ideas of, you can definitely use this as a starting point. But personally, I think the human definitely needs to be there to tailor this to what you need. It's not the same as going and purchasing a template of a contract someone's already made that might be more specifically tailored to the field you're in. It's going to take some work. You still need to know that you have to read this over and make sure it says what you want it to say. Lori, when you think about people in workforce development who might be at the beginning of their journey, are there other things that you think they need to be on the lookout for with documents like this if they're trying to create something from scratch that can be reproduced?
Well, making sure that they are legally sound, for example.
Yeah.
And
Yes, ma'am. Just say, ma'am. I'm trying those things.
cancellation, making sure it's very specific for what reasons, what is a documented medical emergency, examples.
What kind of documentation does a documented medical emergency require? Sure, yeah.
Number 9, I would include the state of Kentucky, Fayette County Courts, Lexington.
Right, and if you know...
Detailed.
Yeah, if because you could totally tailor that if you're like, well, I'm speaking at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green. So now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I need to mention Warren County or something like that.
Go Hilltoppers.
Yeah.
That was a setup.
So, yeah, these are all concerns that I think address what we talked about today, just the importance of a human, the way that it can take work off my shoulders. Now, I don't necessarily need to call and schedule a meeting with a lawyer, go meet with them, talk about what I want, then they tell me they're going to send me something back, and then I have to go and review it again. Like Dr. Garvey said, my efficiency can increase if I can at least make this document that says vaguely what I want, and then I go seek a representative who's going to make it actually binding. That's one day, right? And as a small business owner, then that's one day for me, and that frees me up to do so much more work and things like that. But then if I'm going to present something, I can also say, so Gemini gives us the advantage because it is now part of the Google suite, right? So you get access to Google Sheets or Google Slides or Google Sites and things like that. So I'm going to try this. We don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to say, write me a 5-slide presentation on how AI can be used in libraries. Let's see what it does.
You've done this before.
Aha! However, you never know. So here it's coming up with stuff, and I'm really curious to see if this box, if it's going to give us an image or something like that too, because again, this is plugged into everything. So when we talk about discerning, like Danielle thankfully vamped for me and talked about the idea of figuring out which software you actually want to use. This can be an advantage to using something like this. And this is really interesting. Yeah, right off the bat, it started generating something, and now it's told me we're working to improve Gemini's ability to generate images of people. We expect this feature to return soon, and we'll notify you in release updates when it does, which I think goes back to what Dr. Garvey was talking to us about, where they're trying to self-police on some things, or maybe if the quality's not quite there, or maybe they need to put in additional restrictions on generating images of people for privacy reasons, or I don't know. But so to me, what that kind of makes me think is I'm like, there's kind of not some transparency there of why I'm glad that they're doing something. They seem to be policing themselves on something, but I don't know why they're doing it or what they're trying to do. So it just makes me kind of interested to find out more about what they're trying to do there, and why they've intentionally limited themselves when, like we said, we did run this like last week, and it did give us a presentation just fine. Now it's giving me, it's even shutting down all my drafts. Interesting. But draft 3, so it is giving me one. So twice it tried to give me an image of a person, and then it would not give me the product, because for some reason they've determined that they can't do that. So again, if you're going to use this stuff, just be inquisitive. We talked about actively viewing. You can passively view a Marvel movie, or you can actively view it. Like, ask yourself questions of why is what happening, and things like that. But we've got, right off the bat, an AI-generated image. There's like a shadowy figure of a person in the back there. So it's got an image for me, and then it's got speaker notes for me, so saying what I can say as opposed to the information that would actually be on the slide. So in this presentation, we will explore the exciting ways artificial intelligence, AI, is transforming libraries. From helping patrons find the perfect book to streamlining back-office tasks, AI is making libraries more efficient, user-friendly, and accessible than ever before. AI is not here to replace librarians, but rather to empower them to better serve their communities, which is fascinating to me because that last sentence goes toward exactly what we were saying we wanted, but the sentence right before that is an example of how we were talking about how declarative it can be. Does Gemini have any idea what libraries are actually doing? Does Google own a library? Maybe within their corporate areas, but definitely not a public community-based library. I don't know that it can definitively say, from helping patrons find the perfect book to streamlining back-office tasks. What tasks? AI is making libraries more efficient, user-friendly, and accessible than ever before. That's an extremely declarative sentence, and this is a low-stakes environment, but it's just another example for you of how to focus on what's it saying and can it really say that. But for my slide, it's telling me, enhancing the user experience, personalized recommendations. AI can analyze a patron's borrowing history and suggest similar titles they might enjoy. As someone who works at a library, I think that's totally true. That's that idea of AI can read big chunks of data, and it can read them really fast. And so it can look at what you've done in the past. This is no different. That first example, like we talked about how, whether you know it or not, you've been interacting with AI for decades now. It's just kind of a rebranding thing right now, right? Microsoft Word has been correcting your speech for decades now. Google has been trying to fill in what you're searching for based on things you've done before. And Netflix, like, when you watch one Korean drama, guess what Netflix is giving you every day? It's like, well, listen here, my friend. Welcome back to Seoul. So those things, like, that's something it can do. So that's an example of, as a human, fact-checking this, I can use what I know about AI to say, that's probably true. I'll probably keep that in my presentation. Smart search tools, AI-powered search engines can understand natural language queries and deliver more relevant results. Yeah, maybe that's Google, right? It's talking about Google. I don't know. Maybe I would need to elucidate upon that during my presentation. Virtual assistants, chatbots can answer basic questions, true, guide patrons to resources, and even schedule appointments with librarians. Yeah, if you have a digital calendar, if we talk about a small business owner, yeah, a chatbot could totally do that. As long as you're diligent about keeping your calendar up to date, they can just search your Google Calendar, right? And say, yeah, the problem is you have to be careful because it'll be like, Danielle's free from noon to 1. Well, she's free because she wanted to eat, but now she's in a meeting.
And I've been caught by that many times.
Yeah.
So instead of putting meetings apart 15 minutes apart, I want to put them 5 minutes apart.
Beautiful. And then you're like, yes, I have a meeting in Frankfurt and I have a meeting in Nicholasville. This is excellent.
Exactly. I'll just use my metaverse powers to get across town.
I believe in you. And don't let your dreams be dreams, Danielle.
Right on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can go through the rest of the presentation, but I do want to have us show a couple more things. I think I'm going to try to load up Photoshop real quick because my colleague was going to show us some really cool things that we can do using Firefly. So, again, on the creative aspect, but just some ideas of how you still need to police AI, where it's really powerful, where it's not. The goal is to educate yourself, whether that's reading, whether that's attending events like these, whether that's looking up research. It's just really important to make sure that you are always looking at it with a critical lens because, like Dr. Garvey said before, and again, I'm really like, AI is not going to police you. It's just going to do exactly what you ask it to. Exactly. So if you don't tell it to, I don't know, like, draw me a picture of a dog. Here's a German Shepherd. Well, I was imagining a beagle. Okay, well, you just said draw it a picture of a dog. Stuff like that. Did you want to do any Photoshop? Yeah. So I'll start a new project here. Right. But you were doing something. I thought you were going to do the generative fill. Like
That's what I was thinking too.
But I'm going to just turn it over. This is my colleague, Kayla, who works in the digital studio with me. So she can also help you with making such things.
I am actually just going to pull up.
I see.
Here we go.
Yes. No, you're correct.
Perfect. Okay. So Adobe Firefly is really great as far as generative digital art goes. It's fantastic and really intuitive as far as the way that it goes about it. So like they were talking about, it is going to be very literal. If you just say, draw me a picture of a dog, it's going to give you a general dog, whatever it thinks of. You do need to be very specific as far as what you want. So if I was to type in dogs in a park and click generate, it's going to think for a second. There we go. So it'll give you a few options. These are just general options that it'll show. There we go. So you can ask for, if you scroll further down on the left side where it has all of your different options as far as the art goes, you can choose to upload a reference photo if you have a specific kind of photo in mind. You can ask for different styles. So say I wanted to do, change the style reference. We'll make it layered paper. If you add on a different task, it's going to think for a second about different possibilities it could have. There we go. And so it takes a little bit of experimentation to narrow it down how you want it. Like we said, you're going to need to be very specific. You could even go as far as,
I have a question. What are you doing?
What you got?
At this point right there, is that your proprietary work that you've been copyright? Or do you say it was scraped on the internet and belongs to various individuals, the consumers, and gone that direction? Because you have that I'm going to stay awake because I'm not creative, so I might do my questions on the creative side. But you now have that New York Times assuming about all the big speaker articles. But right here, right now, can you say that that's yours? Because it was your legitimate idea. In professional opinion, then you're active.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that there's probably going to be a lot of lawsuits about this over the next 5 years. But I'm pretty sure that the way it's being set up now, I don't know what Adobe does. I know Midjourney, there used to be a specific relationship that you had to have with Midjourney, and I believe it involved paying them more money than you would pay for a typical subscription that would allow you to basically request or achieve copyright on some of the outputs. So certainly by typing it in just there, right? So when Kayla typed it in just there, the result that comes back, all three of those, you do not have copyright, right? That's for sure. Now, with regards to how it was generated and all that, and what it was trained on, I don't know. Usually training data is not disclosed. I do know that you can go onto a lot of these things and type in, you could go to, say, Midjourney and say, paint this in the style of, I don't know, Frank Frazetta, right? All his stuff's copyrighted, and it'll give you a painting in his style. So somehow it's been trained on his work, right? So it's an open question.
Well, all there's a right way. Run to the world, walks, Lego, the chair.
That's a very valid point. I think I was gonna say, like, for me, if I was literally typing this in, I would put this automatically into a Photoshop or pull it directly into any other like Canva-based type thing and see if there is additional things that I could do. I think what I focus on is how far from the original can we go to make it original. That's really the question. Without snorting, sorry. So I feel like that's kind of where I would go with this. But just answer the question whether or not it's yours. Technically, no, but we're going to say for the sake of creativity, yes, that you can pull this image and use it as a social media post.
So the ethical considerations kind of behind it is, like they were talking about, all of the AI has to be trained somehow. It has to gain this knowledge somehow. And the way that it's gained this knowledge is by looking at other people's art, other things that have been created. And that's how it comes up with all of this. It decides what is most likely that you were looking for. And so it searches through all of its past knowledge of all the art that it's had to create this image for you. So we want to hopefully look at paying the artists who created that art originally, making sure that they are properly compensated for the work that they put in, as well as the consent for their for their art to be used to train that AI. Because I know that we've seen it all out there where art is being used and reused in AI, and it's creating derivative art from their creativity, and it's branching further off to where it's still technically somewhat theirs. You can see that it was theirs to begin with, but it's branched so far that it's now something completely different, So we want to be transparent with artists that are creating for this purpose, and hold accountability for using their art for this purpose.
All right.
Did you want to? Yeah, lovely.
Great job, Kayla.
Yes. And if you Google Adobe and AI, I just pulled up kind of all their ethics and guidelines. They are a company that it's for right now. It seems like are doing all the right things and making sure that the artists and the art and AI are all working together well.
Firefly will put their brand on it, but you go to bad actors. You go to another software and remove that brand, that logo.
That's true.
I don't know how to actually do it. I'm on the analytical side. I was trying to learn how to do all that stuff. Well, I just got frustrated and walked away. But I love Firefly and Rick from the library. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so I took a short 30-second video of Dr. Garvey talking, and I'm going to run that. I'm going to airdrop it from my phone to my laptop. Let you guys be able to hear this. So these are kind of some of the tools that both of our speakers talked about as improving efficiency. So Adobe has a feature now called Enhanced Voice,
Yes.
which would take a audio recording and make it, and I think you referenced that, and use AI to where to make it sound like you were in a recording studio.
Absolutely.
So yes, and it is. So let's take. So I just airdropped it from my phone, and we're gonna take this movie, and I'm gonna put it into here. So what the AI is doing is analyzing the audio, and it's gonna treat it. It's gonna do the job of a mastering engineer, to where it's gonna remove background. It's gonna try to pull up the voices. It's gonna try to remove the echo. So that goes to what you guys were talking about, like as far as like accessibility, and and Dr. Garvey, your skills on, well, you may be good at this, but you don't have that set of skills. So this is an example of where AI might be able to come in and step in and improve the quality of the product that you have.
Brian, could we do a before and after?
Yes, for sure. So while it's doing that, I also have Premiere Pro.
Playing with all my toys.
No, right?
And remember, though, here's the lightweight.
And yeah, and the digital. Yes. So and next Saturday at the same time, we're going to do the AI for Creatives workshop, where we're going to give all the participants a hands-on opportunity to work with this AI software on how to improve, your workflow and using that. So I'm going to pull in, the video. Yes. So I have it now here on my timeline, and I am going to, so this is just a 30-second clip. Let's see, can you all hear that?
Great.
Okay, so remember, I was way far away from them. So one of the things that Premiere can do is that it is going to, I'm going to have it create a transcript of this. Let's see, separate speakers, don't need separate speakers. And so it's going to analyze this 30-second clip, video-wise, and in just what? Seconds. It did a transcription of what Dr. Garvey said. So yeah, you guys may not be able to see that, but it says historically they would have to have really owned, or would have to rely on somebody else to do one portion. They can do it. So it's not all the way there, but as they said, it's a starting spot. It's like a first draft. As someone that has done transcribing for television before, I know that it takes, for a 30-minute show, you're probably spending 4 to 5 hours, going through that process, where this just gave me a very somewhat accurate, 80 to 90% of the way there, to where now I can go back in and do that, and then maybe finish my work quicker, to where I can take on more clients now.
Brad, how much is the cost of this if you are unable to get to the digital studio?
So I think there are options out there. The resources to where there would be free transcriptions. There's a website called Rev that is very. I think it's only like 8 to 10 cents, a minute for doing for AI transcriptions, and I noticed that in Dropbox, they've recently added a AI suite, which I think also includes transcribing. So I think kind of as we continue to see these AI tools roll out and embedded in popular software, we're going to see more, accessibility to those kinds of things.
I want to add to that. Opus Clips is absolutely free up to, I think, 2 to 3 hours. It is something that you can use. It does want to leave a watermark, so I should tell you that up front. But it is something that you can use for both reels and vertical format and horizontal format for your videos. So YouTube would be great for that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I know it's in beta with Adobe is that you're going to be able to. So obviously, this presentation was in English. So we could right now I could set this to where it would transcribe it into Spanish. But eventually, probably within the next year, the AI is going to be able to generate your original video and dub that into a different language using your voice as the model. Those are tools that are being developed right now to where, if you wanted your video in 10 different languages, you'd be able to do that, which is also an empowering tool, for content creators to, get your messaging out to more people. So let's check on my podcast. Okay. So let's see. So I'm going to turn this off. No, I think it's that one.
That is skills statistical. Or they would have to really.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but before I had it the before you couldn't even hear it, the audio. But then when I turned on the AI,
relied on somebody else to do more portion, they can kind of do a lot, man. Right? That would kind of education. There are prompt engineers on the West Coast, and they hundreds of thousands a year.
So this is with it off. So that's pretty remarkable, to run that because for someone who doesn't know the know-how, or even for, like an expert that does, you're saving a lot of time, to where you would have to go in and find the EQ. I hear our heating and air system on, so I'm going to have to, find the EQ for that. I'm going to have to bump up, the vocals, which may cause more issues. But, if AI can get it started for me, then, that's all the better. All right.
Cheaper than hanging a second ceiling and building a subfloor.
Well, I want to thank our panelists again for coming, Danielle and Dr. Garvey. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It was an honor to have you all here at the library today. Let's give a big round of applause to both of them. A big thanks to Rick and Lori, our moderators, for the discussion. And then Kayla Aldridge for showing us the Firefly. So as we talked about more opportunities to learn about AI and to have the library be a resource and a point of access for the community for this. So these are 4 upcoming classes that I already talked about. You can get a flyer on your way out. We do hope to have more AI discussions because as Dr. Garvey said, that this is a revolution. And we want people to be comfortable using these tools. We don't want just big tech and these are tools for everyone to use in their everyday lives. So we certainly hope that the library will be an important factor for you all discovering ways to do that. So thanks again for coming. We hope to see you at the Digital Studio or one of our other learning spaces, or at other programs that we have, and we appreciate it. Thank you.